Hi, my name is Brett Hoskins, and I'm the Assistant Director of Career Development, and I serve the College of Agricultural Sciences, Forestry, and Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. And I'm joined by my colleague, Carla. So introduce yourself, Carla.
Hi, I'm Carla Rockold, and I'm Assistant Director of Career Development like Britt, and I serve the Colleges of Liberal Arts and Education.
So this is a fun session because we have kind of the STEM perspective and the liberal arts perspective. So whatever degree you're coming from, we're speaking from a diverse perspective. So I like to remind people that this session will be recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded for some reason, you can always make your name be anonymous. You could take your video on or off. I would encourage people to have their videos on just because it's nice to present to faces so we know if we need to pause or answer a question or something. The way we are going to do questions is we're kind of dividing this presentation in half. So Carla's going to teach the first half of it and then pause for questions in the middle. So if you put your questions in the chat, we'll just wait to answer them to the middle of the presentation. And then I'll do the second half and then we'll take whatever remaining questions are at the end. So kind of 2 question chunks there. Let's see here. We'll share the recording with anybody who attended today or anybody who registered. So if you had to pop off or something, you should still be able to see the end. Anything I'm missing, Carla?
I think that's it.
Okay, well, take it away, Carla. And I'm going to share my screen and do the slides here.
Yeah, need slides.
Does that look good to everybody?
That looks good, Britt. All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for coming today. We had a lot of people sign up, so we're happy to present during Grad Appreciation Week. So I'll let Britt go to our first slide. All right, so why is modernizing your CV important today? Well, actually, the job market is more competitive now than ever. COVID has made it especially competitive, as all of you know. And the average job right now is getting about 250 plus applications. That's mostly in the private sector. But I did some research yesterday, and tenure track positions are getting on average of 82 to 700 applications. So as I said, it's very competitive out there, so it's really important that your CV stand out amongst the competition. Another thing to remember is that employers aren't going to read your whole CV. They're going to be checking out that first page. And if they're not drawn in at the first page, they're probably not going to go on and read the rest of your CV. So most of your CVs are going to be, especially if you're applying for jobs in higher education, it's going to be screened by faculty members on search committees who may or may not be from your specific area of expertise. So they could be faculty members from a wide array of departments on campus. So their backgrounds are all going to be different. Oh, if somebody could unmute themselves, that would be great. The next thing is recruiters want to be able to skim your resume really quickly and easily, looking for keywords and phrases from the position description. As they say, the average resume or CV is scanned in about 6 to 10 seconds. So you've got to capture their attention in a very short period of time. And the next, many employers, about 90% of private employers are using Applicant Tracking System, or ATS, to narrow down the candidates. So as Britt wrote in our slide, the machine is your first audience that's scanning and reviewing your resume. And again, if your resume looks outdated, it might create some unconscious bias during the application process. So having that modern twist is going to make you stand out again amongst the competition. All right, next slide, Britt. All right, so some of our top 10 tips for modernizing that CV of yours is: 1, you got to tailor your CV to each and every position that you apply to. Yes, that seems like a lot of work, but it's going to help you stand out amongst the competition. So generally, Britt and I recommend that you have, one CV that's the quote, the kitchen sink, where you put everything on it. But that's not the one you send to the employers. What you're going to do then is take your kitchen sink resume and then tailor it and move sections according to the position description. So if the position description really focuses on teaching and or research, then that's what's you're going to showcase on your first page of your CV. The next tip is to include a skill-based profile statement. Sometimes these are called summary profiles or professional profiles. You're going to want to include one of these at the top of your CV. We don't use objective statements any longer. That will definitely date your CV and or resume. And also remember that this skills-based profile statement is optional. Some employers love them, some employers are neutral on them, some employers hate them. So that's why it's always good to find out, get some insider information on what your particular institution that you're applying to or job that you're applying to might be looking for in a CV. But why you want to have a skills-based profile statement at the top is because it tells your story with carefully selected language. These are especially great if you aren't able to attach a cover letter to the application process, so that it kind of gives some context for your skills and how it's related to that position. And as we said in our earlier slide, the employers are looking at your first page of your CV, so you want to hit them with the good stuff first. And so having that profile statement will give them a really good overview of everything else that they might find in your CV. The next thing is you got to catch the eye of the HR people and the ATS programs by using keywords and phrases from the position description. That is a must, because what ATS does is it scans your resume or CV for the keywords, and if it doesn't match a certain percentage as established by that employer, then it automatically kicks you out of the system. 75% of all resumes and CVs uploaded to ATS get kicked out because it didn't match the parameters that the company is looking for. Also, focus on skimmability. You want to use bullet points, not paragraphs. It's sort of like an outline of your accomplishments, so it has to be really easy for the employer to skim and look for keywords and phrases or skill sets that in a very fast and efficient way. Next, consider a hybrid format, especially like a scientifically focused 2-page resume with just very selected academic accomplishments that are relevant to the position that you're applying to. Then you can add relevant projects, coursework, training. Those are all excellent things to put on a modern CV. And more modern than ever is to highlight your media, your social media presence, your websites, recorded lectures, video. Maybe you've done a TED Talk. Also have that LinkedIn profile, your personal URL on your CV and or resume as well. And then you need to provide context. They need to see how relevant the work you've done is to that position, and also spell out acronyms. They don't know what CO stands for if they're not part of OSU. So spell out those acronyms, and then you can put in parentheses after that word, the acronym, and then you can use the acronym throughout your CV or resume. And then again, focus on accomplishments. They want to know how you stood out, how you made a difference, how you just went above and beyond the expectations of that position. And then get feedback. Ask at least 3 people to look at your CV. Those 3 people could be a professor, the writing center at OSU. It could be someone like myself or Britt in the career development center. So you want to get some eyes on that resume and CV, because after you've looked at it and spent a lot of time on it, everything all starts to look the same and you can't identify things that could be improved in it. All right, next slide, Britt. All right, so make the master or that kitchen sink CV. So dump everything into a template CV, and then you can cut and rearrange based on that specific position that you're applying to. So we've listed a bunch of different section topics that you might have that you could break up your CV into. And again, look at the position description. That's your guide to determine what types of titles you should be using on your sections throughout your CV and or resume. So sections that you have to include obviously would be, your education section, but you also could have an entire section on research or publications, teaching, professional experience, projects, fieldwork, or practicum. Professional societies, university service, they're looking for people that go above and beyond. Community involvement, leadership, technical skills, languages, coursework and trainings. Even if those were workshops that you attended, those are great to add to your CV. Again, licenses and certificate, if you were a guest lecturer, awards and grants and conferences that you attended. So there's lots of things that you could put on your CV and or resume to make it stand out amongst the competition. All right, next slide, Britt. Great. So where to start? I've already hinted at this. Start at the position description. This is going to give you an immense amount of insight into what the employers are looking for. Again, the position description is going to summarize the essential responsibilities and activities that you're going to be doing in that role, the qualifications and skills necessary to be considered a top applicant, perhaps the mission, vision, and values of the institution or organization you're applying to, and then the main accountabilities that you'll be responsible for in that role. So the first page of your CV needs to showcase the employer that you have the skills and the experience to back up what you've done and are a perfect candidate for that position. So the first page showcases your most relevant experience first. And then you're going to scan that scan that position description and look for keywords and phrases that you can reflect back in the resume. The reason you want to do that is, one, because ATS is going to be scanning for those keywords and phrases, and two, employers are looking for someone like-minded. They haven't met you yet. They don't know if you're like-minded. The only way that you're going to be able to showcase that is by using words and phrases that are important to them in your resume and cover letter. So again, really analyze that position description, find all that information, and then showcase that in your resume and cover letter. And back to the other slide that Britt just kind of threw through. Also do research on that organization. So go to their social media pages like Google, go to their site, then Google them, go to their LinkedIn site. Perhaps they have Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Glassdoor is another great site where you can do research on that company or organization and find out what's important to them. All right, next slide, Britt. All right, so next is the objective or qualification statement. Well, as I said, an objective is pretty dated. So we don't put objectives on anymore. There's a few minor industries that do use those, like accounting and so forth, but unless you're going into the accounting industry, I don't recommend an objective statement. A qualification statement is definitely much better. You can get ideas about how to create a really strong qualification statement from sites like Indeed and the Balance Careers, the Muse, and Glassdoor. They have excellent examples if you're kind of stressed about how do I create a really strong one. And then we have some examples here of qualification statements. So you could either create like a couple of sentences. I don't recommend more than 3 sentences. Or about 50 words, or you could do bullet points. So either one of these formats would work great. So the first qualification statement is food science professional with skills in pH meters, measuring bricks, working in a food safety lab, and hands-on quality assurance experience in berry processing facility. So as you can see, it's all written in second person. There's no personal pronouns, and it focuses on skills that you bring to the employer. Where an objective statement would have focused on what you're looking for, the skills qualification statement really focuses on what you bring to the employer. What are they looking for? Then you could do a summary with bullet points. That's another option. You can say 2 years of experience in brewing industry, including recipe design and execution, public speaking experience and supervision of 5 employees, coursework, and then you would list some coursework. So And again, the skills that you would mention in these statements are going to come directly from the position description that you have. That's what you're going to utilize. Next slide, Britt. All right, so add some color, power verbs and quantifying. I like to think of your resume as, you know, an outline of your story. But how do you bring excitement for the employer to be thrilled about reading your resume and want to go on, or your CV, and go on beyond the second page, go on beyond the first page to the second page? It's adding some color through verbs and quantifying. So you want to use really exciting, specific, active verbs. You can find a great list of these verbs on the Career Development Center's website. We have 185 great verbs that you can use. Also, look at the verbs that are used in that position description. So if they said supervise, analyze, coordinated, develop, investigated, facilitated, manage, you would use the same verbs whenever applicable in your CV or resume. And then quantify. So think to yourself, gosh, if I did sales, how many sales did I do? Did I do $10,000 worth of sales? Did I help raise $20,000 for a nonprofit? Did I win first place in a competition? Did I increase productivity by 25%, or create a 32-page manual, or do 7 presentations in 4 weeks, or did I have 35 plus students in my class? So whenever you can infuse numbers in your CV or resume, you want to do that. The eye is automatically drawn to numbers on the page. And if the object is to get the employer to spend as much time on your CV or resume reviewing it, then adding numbers throughout is going to help them be more engaged and interested in what you have to say. All right, so I want to see, does anyone have any questions for me at this point? Whether they're in the chat box, you can put them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask me a question. I'm happy to answer it. I want to do that, give you time before Britt takes over.
And we're doing great on time. So we have up to 10 minutes for questions right now. So any thoughts you already have, yeah, feel free.
All right, and somebody just said, is there a typical cut-up percentage of keywords an ATS will look for to pass your application? From my understanding, from what I've heard from people that study ATS, is it's about 40 to 60% of the language. And also, if you might be hesitant to reuse a verb more than once, especially if you've ever heard of a word cloud, where what you can do is you can copy paste the entire position description into a word cloud and see what words come up the most. If a word pops up and is really prevalent in that position description, that means that it's very, very important to the employer. So you can use that particular verb or phrase multiple times in your resume or CV. So I went to a webinar all about ATS, and they said that actually that will work in your favor. Obviously, you don't want to overuse the verb like 20 times, but if you use it like 2 to 3 times, especially if it's an important word, that will give you more points. So what happens is the ATS filters all the resumes that have been uploaded, and then it spits out like a spreadsheet for the employer of who are the top 10 candidates that meet the highest percentages of matching the position description. And then oftentimes those are the only people the employer will contact for an interview. So you want to be in that, hopefully that top 10 number of resumes or CVs that are actually going to be viewed by a live human being.
So Carla, we have our second question. What kind of trainings are worth adding to your CV? I'm thinking specifically about the library workshops I've done. Should those be included, or should it only be including trainings that resulted in the certificate?
Yeah, that's a great question, and both Britt and I can answer that one. So I would think trainings that are specifically relevant to that position. So maybe you attended a workshop at a conference, and it was relevant to something that is mentioned in the position description, then that's what I would include. I wouldn't include things that are completely irrelevant. Like maybe you're applying to higher ed positions and you've done a training on diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. That would work out great. Or you took one on hiring processes, like So at OSU, we have lots of, oh gosh, I can't even think of it, but where you work, you learn how to be on a hiring committee. Can't even think, I took it too.
Search advocate.
Yeah, search advocate. Thank you, Britt. Yeah, search advocate. You did a search advocate training, or you did public speaking training, anything that would be relevant, so that if you think, gosh, if I were an employer, what kinds of workshops would I hope that a great employee that I'm looking at hiring would have had or would have on their resume or CV? Okay, next question. Is there a way to pass through a mock ATS to see if enough words are hitting? There is a tool out there that you can use. It's called, oh my gosh, I'm totally blank. JobScan. And JobScan, you can use 1 month for free. And what you do with JobScan is you get the URL for the position that you're applying to, and you put it into JobScan, and then you upload your CV or resume, and then JobScan will tell you how well you matched the language of the position description in your CV or resume. So the first month is free, and then after that, it's I think about $39. But if you're really concerned or you're having a difficult time getting interviews, then you probably need to really look at your resume or CV, because obviously it's not rising to the level that the employer is looking for. So utilizing a tool like JobScan will be very helpful to see if you're aligning well with their ATS software. Now, again, not all universities are using ATS. Some are, some aren't. So the universities are a little bit different. But if you're applying for positions in a private sector or government, I would especially use a tool like JobScan to help you through that process. Any other questions that come to mind? There's no dumb questions, first of all. Do I need to put my physical address in my CV? No, you do not need to put your physical address at all. I would recommend, though, your city and state. A lot of employers have told me they appreciate having a city and state on there, especially if you're going to be doing some remote work, and they maybe perhaps would prefer having all of their employees in the same time zone. So, you know, worst case, best case scenario, at least put your city and state on your CV or resume, but not your actual physical address. That's really helpful for employers. The only person that really should know your physical address is the HR people once they've offered you the job.
And I would add to that that sometimes that has to do with if you're applying out of state, sometimes having your physical address on there can be a little bit of a disadvantage. So you might decide whether it helps you or hurts you for a particular employer. So if you really want to work in Alaska, but you're in New York, you might not mention your address, but you know, if you're applying in the same town where you live, they're like, oh, this person's local. They already live here. That's maybe we don't have to pay for their location package. So that's just something to consider.
That is, and that is very true. So yeah, you're going to have to weigh that option, whether you want to disclose the city and state or not. How useful is that information going to be? And if an employer, you can always reach out to an employer and ask too, if they're going to be offering relocation. And if they say no, then don't put your city and state on there. So you can just do a general email or a phone call and kind of hint around about what they're going to be offering as the package for the position. Someone says some companies use ATS to extract information from CV and automatically put them into sections. Usually the sections mess up the words from CV. How important is for us to correct each section on the website? I know that often does feel like rewriting your CV, but it's really critical because some employers are only going to pull up the document that, depending on how their hiring practices, they're only going to pull up the document that is in the application portal. Some of them are going to pull up that and your CV and your cover letter. So it really depends. So I would, take the time and correct the information as it's uploaded into the applicant system, because it's going to help you stand out in the end. Again, if that's happening a lot, then you really have to go back and analyze your CV too. Like, what is it about the format of your CV or the language in your CV that is creating a disconnect between that document and what the ATS system is seeing as well. All right, does social media link, say LinkedIn, make sense in a physical copy of a resume? Yes, it does. You don't have to have an actual link, but you should have the URL at least on your resume or CV and any social media that you want the employer to look at, because it will populate into the ATS as other ways to analyze. And really think of your LinkedIn as your electronic portfolio or your electronic CV or resume. It's something you can build on and add to. Right now, LinkedIn just added a feature where you can record yourself kind of doing your elevator pitch. So that's something new that LinkedIn has just recently added. And a lot of employers really like that because it kind of helps take away that need for that initial phone screen. So it just speeds up the hiring process that much more.
And I would add on LinkedIn, I would recommend people customize their LinkedIn URL because you can make your own like LinkedIn/Britt Hoskins instead of the messy one. And then when you put that on your CV, cut all the HTTP, www, just like get to like linkedin.com/your name. Yeah. And that's a lot cleaner and nicer looking on a CV.
Definitely. Always customize your URL. Somebody asked, what about age and ethnicity, marital status, gender? Should we include this information? No. All of that is actually not legal for an employer to ask you about, so don't include any of that. I mean, if you have a LinkedIn profile, they can do some deduction on their own about those things, but you really want to not put any personal information on your resume or CV at all. I know in some foreign countries that is much more prevalent than in the US, but in the US we do not include that type of information. Let's see, commenter, but it's on yes. Yes, Britt wrote that. Okay, any other questions before we send it over to Britt? Nope. Okay, Britt, take it away.
Okay, we have one more question from Megan that just popped up. ResearchGate now has an experience section, also includes publications and projects. Would you say this is also good to include? Yeah, I would say in general, any sort of academic presence you have online where your publications are posted, I would include links to those kinds of things as well. And we're going to talk about research websites and things like that. So that's coming up. So good prompt.
Yay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. So I'm going to go to the second set here. So a lot of questions about ATS, and we're going to actually go into ATS a little bit more. But one of the best things you can do for ATS is use OSU's robot to your advantage. So who better to find to think through your resume than for a robot than an actual other robot. So if you have not used VMOC before, it is our automatic online resume reviewer. So you can upload your CV or resume and it will give you instantaneous feedback. VMOC is located on the Career Center website, career.oregonstate.edu. So a note for CVs is that VMOC is looking more for traditional resumes. So it will probably gripe at you about your page length being long and that kind of thing. And ignore that kind of stuff and just take the feedback that is helpful to you. It will help you maybe notice if you're repeating certain words, or it'll help you with it phrasing or formatting. So I recommend that every student at OSU use VMOC while you're here. It's only available to current students, and it literally takes you 5 minutes to get some good feedback. I also like to tell people that don't pay too much attention to the score because it has all these parameters on the back end where it's subtracting off lots of points for very minor things. So most people end up scoring in the middle on the range. It's really hard to get into that green zone unless you really try to game your resume and keep changing it until you get it perfect. But do take whatever feedback it gives you and apply it. So again, career.oregonstate.edu has this and many other resources. So one thing to consider is, what's the industry you're going into? This is really going to affect the type of CV or the type of resume that you're using. So a lot of grad students are looking at government. I'm not actually going to teach on government, but we do do several sessions on government throughout the year that I would recommend you check into. In the fall, we'll typically bring a couple of recruiters in to talk through applications. And in the winter, I typically host a government panel talking about kind of like a day in the life of governments. But if you're serious about doing a government path, go to the Career Center website, and on our resume page, we have all kinds of stuff that will help you with your government resume. We have guides that are from the federal government, we have tip sheets, and we have several federal resume samples there. And the reason that I'm emphasizing this is that government is a whole other can of worms. And if you don't know how to do a government resume, you will not get picked. Because of the way that their parameters work and what they're scanning for, if you don't make a government resume, you're going to get bumped out. So just a couple notes on government, and then I'll move on, because it isn't really a CV. It's more of a complex resume. They're much longer. They typically are 3 to 7 pages if you are an early career professional. You must meet all the minimum requirements in the job description, or they will bump you out. So it's a matter of going through your resume like a checklist and making sure you have every single word. And then there's a bunch of extra information like hours worked per week and your supervisor name and number, and a bunch of extra stuff. So again, if you're doing the government, find some samples. USA Jobs also hosts frequent webinars that you can watch where they teach you how to do all this stuff and they'll answer your questions. So take some time to learn about that. So the other common place where you might be making a CV would be academia or science. So if you're planning to apply at a university or a lab or something like that, you're going to probably have a more traditional academically focused resume. So the value system behind this type of CV is it's your entire scholarly record. So you're trying to think of as many things as you can that show that you're qualified. So you're not just gonna, put random things, but I like to say, like, anytime you've sneezed in a lab, write it down. So if you've given a presentation, if you've mentored an undergraduate, anything you did that's kind of academic focused, write it down. Every committee, every award, everything. So length is no object here. And in fact, many of your major professors, if you haven't looked at their CVs, they're often 60 pages plus when they're going for tenure. So they just kind of keep collecting all of those academic accomplishments. And I can tell you, as someone who has served on search committees in a university, that we have that same mentality of meeting all the minimum requirements and how we do it. So Carla was mentioning search advocate training. When we're evaluating a candidate, we will go through and build a grid, and the grid will include each minimum requirement. We will talk about how they met it or didn't meet it and use that as a criteria for including them or bumping them out. So state universities like Oregon State, we really care about fairness. So that really comes through, and you really have to make sure you're showing evidence of meeting minimum requirements. And then you got your private sector or nonprofit, which they could be asking for a CV or they could be asking for a resume. And they value reviewing quickly. So how quickly can I skim this stack of 100 resumes and pick my top 5 or 10 and start interviewing? So you really want to think about skimmability, like Carla was talking about. These tend to be 1 to 2 pages long, but that really depends on the amount of experience. This is one of the most common questions I get is, does my resume have to be 1 page? It totally depends on the situation. I've definitely been on search committees where I've reviewed candidates who had a 5-page resume because they've been in the field for 20 years and they've done everything. And so that just shows how qualified they are. I would say that your average college student that maybe has a couple of internships and a little bit of experience here or there are going to be looking at 1 to 2 pages. But if you have really robust experience, it might be longer. So the interesting difference between private sector and the other 2 audiences that I mentioned is that you can be in the ballpark of qualified and be interviewed. So a lot of times employers don't really know what they want. They kind of just write down some stuff and they post a thing and then they say, who am I going to get? And something that I like to mention here is that, and I might not have the percentages exactly, but the average woman will only apply if she feels that she's like 95% qualified, and the average man will say like, yeah, 50% qualified, I'm good to go, I'm going to apply. So this is just a little note to those of you who might not have the confidence to just throw your name in the ring. Apply. If you are in the ballpark of qualified, apply, and just do your best to sell the skills that you do have. Don't count yourself out. If they're not going to pick you, leave that up to them, but pick yourself. So that's something to keep in mind. They don't, they're trying to move fast. And so the networking piece becomes really important in the private sector as well as the other sectors. So let's talk a little bit about academic CVs. So this is the basics and how you can modernize. So the basics would be things like publications. So I would advise you to be having regular conversations with either a mentor in your field or your faculty that you're working with. What's a good amount of publications? Do you need to get more publications? Can you break your dissertation into a bunch of little chunks and publish all those? Can you be a second author on several pieces? How do you get that publication number up if that's what you're evaluated on? Are book chapters and papers, does that count? I would include all of those things, but it varies field to field what you're going to need in order to be compelling. But publications is a pretty common measure. And I hate to say this, but I have heard that some search committees will even just like count the number of publications you have and use that as their main criteria. So if it's something to consider in your graduate journey, how you're prioritizing your work. Are you spending too much time, say, teaching if you're evaluated on publications? Or are you going into teaching? So you need to spend a lot of time in the classroom. It's just something to kind of keep your mind on as you're progressing. Think about, I also added here, sometimes you can list publications that are not completed yet and just put like a parentheses that says, manuscript complete or manuscript submitted. So you might have 5 things in the hopper that are essentially done, but they're not published yet. I would encourage you to still include those, just qualify where they're at so that they know. Conferences. So making sure that you're being active in important conferences for your field. So if you're just starting out in your grad program, you might want to try like a regional conference or an OSU-based conference to kind of get a sense of how these conferences go and to get comfortable, and then start building towards a higher prestige conference. Another thing to think about is like grants. So again, if you want to be a traditional faculty member, you have to think about how do they evaluate faculty members. And a lot of it is, are they doing great research and publishing, and then can they bring money into the department? So can you get a grant? And this might be, you ask your faculty if you can be a co-writer on a grant. It could be that there's a grant that you could get on your own or some kind of fellowship. So just thinking about maybe making grants a part of the picture that you're working on. So let's talk about the modern edge here. Things that I've seen or that have worked well in CVs. So one thing to consider, and I don't necessarily recommend putting your whole CV in a table for ATS purposes. I will tell you about that a little bit more. But I have seen really snazzy tables that are used to organize a bunch of information in a visual way, and I like this. So for example, I was working with a student in, I think, CEOs who had been on a lot of ocean voyages. And so the table had the names of the voyages, the hours at sea or the days at sea, and then the focus in different columns. I've also seen people do it with like courses where they list the course name and the number of students and the focus area, and they kind of lay it all out in a pretty table. So I like that kind of thing. I'm just throwing that out there. We got this question in the chat. So showcasing your online presence in your non-online CV. So if you have great work online, whether that's in the form of a research website or an academia.edu or a ResearchGate or LinkedIn, feel free to put that on your resume. It's a good way to showcase a lot of your projects and to make things a bit more interactive so that people can learn more about you. So if you have that online presence, I would recommend kind of marrying those two together so that it's in both places. We actually also got this question, so you guys are all over it. A modern thing to consider if you're going the academic route would be to think about what kind of trainings you have. And diversity, equity, and inclusion work has always been important, but it's particularly in the spotlight these days. So I would definitely, anything you've done in the DEI world, I would include it, as well as like Title IX trainings, mentorships you've done, any type of service you've done at the university or trainings that you think would be relevant. It could be like teaching in an online format. Think about what are some of the hot topics that might be really important for our hiring committee. This is a tip that I got from the Professor is In, which is an interesting, albeit a little bit cynical website that gives some good tips. So organize a conference panel and include some celebrity researchers from your field. So if you're, as part of a conference, you can propose a panel on, say, like cross-laminated timber, whatever your field is all about. And you invite some professors that are really well known for this to speak on this panel. And so in doing that, you can add their names to the CV, you can get to know them, you can network with them and kind of get them in your camp. So this is, if you, it might have to be virtual these days, of course, but this is just something to consider if you're really trying to stand out for a tenure position. And then we're going to talk about using headers to group your experience. So most people think that in resumes and CVs that there are these unspoken rules that you have to follow, and one of those is that it has to say education, experience, and volunteering. But you can make your headers say whatever you want. So I really encourage you to tailor your resume or your CV to benefit you. So this person is in counseling, and so they group their experience in clinical and supervision experience. So they're not just going to say experience, they want to call that out. Or, you know, it could be oceanography fieldwork, or it could be writing and communication projects. So if you can start inserting keywords, not only into the text of the CV, but into the headers, that's when people are skimming, that's what they see is the headers. And one of the tips that I really like to give people is sometimes you can break your experience into multiple sections. So sometimes your most relevant or your most recent job is not your most relevant, but chronologically it comes first. And that can create an impression issue as people are reading your resume because they're like, oh, well, this person's kind of, you know, they're working at a golf shop right now. And that might be what you're doing to kind of make some money, but you also have done this really cool fellowship and you've done, you know, this internship in your field. Well, you might have two sections, and one section might be called, you know, business experience, and you list those things that are most relevant in chronological order. And then the next section might be additional professional experience. And then you kind of list some of the stuff that you're doing to make ends meet. So just by doing that kind of thing, you can prioritize and move up sections that are going to help you and move down sections that are, they're still relevant. They show that you're, you know, a good worker and that you can work with people and you've done some customer service, but you can kind of differentiate the stuff that is really relevant to your field versus not. So use headers to your advantage. The resume and the CV are at their core, they are selling documents. So they're an advertisement for you. So one of the things that you can do is to build your own scholarly website. I highly recommend this if you're going into the academic world or into any sort of science or research field. So I wanted to just pause from this presentation and just show you a recent OSU PhD student made a really great presentation, and she told me I could share it with people. She probably didn't know how many people I would share it with, but here we are. So Erin was a recent PhD in, let's see, she did like sediment coring, and she built this great website on Wix, and I've heard a lot of students use that. And it just showcases her work, outreach, teaching. She's got this great video of them, you know, sediment coring, which is pretty hardcore. I guess this was done through university marketing. But this is a great place for your CV to live. So she has her CV here. as a snapshot and also downloadable. So her CV lives here. She has her research projects. So you can say, oh, I want to learn about marsh sediment and carbon accumulation. And then you can learn about her research, and she's got an abstract, and she's got teaching. She's got her teaching philosophy and teaching CV. So there's a lot of tools out there where you don't have to be a coder to make a great website. So this is something to really think about, especially if you're going into the research world. Okay, so like I said, it's a place for your CV to live, for your projects to live, a great place to tell your story. It can enhance your current CV. And I've listed a couple of websites here that people use commonly, and there's usually like a free version and a paid version. So if you want your own domain name, like erinpeck.com, so if you Google Erin, that comes up, you have to pay for that. So it might be the kind of thing that you do strategically for 2 or 3 years as you're getting your career started, and then you might go to the free version. So Wix, Squarespace, and Weebly are a few that have been recommended to me by current students. And I've used Wix myself before. So I see some questions popping up, so we'll definitely get to all of those in just a few minutes. Let's see how we're doing here. Okay, I'll have to move a little faster here. I also wanted to mention, a lot of you might be going into industry, and sometimes they'll ask for a CV, but a lot of times they ask for a resume, and it makes you think, gosh, what do I do? So oftentimes for this situation, I recommend a 2-page scientifically focused resume. So this is a really good example I got from a student like 2 weeks ago. She's in marine resource management. So maybe might be working for, I don't know, like a fishery, or let's say you're a geologist or a hydrologist, someone who's like an applied scientist. You might want to consider like a hybrid where you include selected publications, selected presentations. You don't necessarily include every poster session you've ever done or every academic training, but you focus in on some of the top stuff. And then you focus on some of your experience, you bring in some skills, you put in a few classes, and you basically create something that's a resume, but it has your science in it. And a couple of details that I'll point out that I like about this resume is the use of lines to break up text. I think this can really help in CVs that get so long. And you can actually go hyphen, 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 enter, and it will create an auto line for you. I just learned that. That's helpful. So creating lines to break up sections, strategic use of bolding, using bullet points like we mentioned to navigate. And then remember, you don't have to include the whole kitchen sink. Think about what's most relevant and what's going to be easiest to read in a more of a private sector environment. Okay, let's talk about ATSs. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, we're just a few slides, so I'll have to rush a little bit here. So 98% of Fortune 500 companies use ATSs. So if you're going to apply to a big company like Nike, you're going to have a computer reading it. If you're applying to a smaller company, maybe not, but it's just something to really be thinking about these days. So what an ATS does is it takes your resume and it converts it to plain text, and then it scans for keywords like Carla was mentioning. So this creates problems if you have like a 2-column resume or CV and everything gets squished because it's marrying up all those words. Or if you have your resume in a table, this could create problems because it's stripping out all the text so that it can read it. So we recommend very simple formatting, your bolding, italics, underlining, that will come through the ATS fine. But whenever you get too fancy and too graphic-y, you have to expect that the ATS might get it jumbled. So tips for ATSs, make sure that you're including those minimum requirements. Go through the job description, highlight keywords, highlight skills, and make sure you're using the exact same words, not similar words, the exact same words. So if they're using the word analyze a lot, use analyze, don't use investigate. So you really want to be creating a match, because what it'll do is it'll bring up a screen and it'll say, this one's a 90% match, this one's a 40% match, this is a 30% match. And the HR person will say, okay, I'm going to look at 70% or above. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the best qualified candidates. It's just they're looking at the word-to-word match. So one of the tips that I was learning about this is spelling out and using the acronym, because you don't know which version of the word they use. So you might have Masters of Science in whatever, and then you maybe would do parentheses MS, because they might be scanning for both. So here we have Licensed Social Worker, LSW, and Master of Business Administration, MBA. So think about the acronym and spelling it out. Make sure that you follow their directions on the type of document you submit. 45% of resumes are blocked because they submitted the wrong file type. So usually it's going to be a Word doc or a PDF. We already talked about fancy formatting. Make sure you don't apply to 20 jobs at the same company, because that could tip off an ATS that you're not really specific for that one job. And then don't try to cheat the ATS. Some people will do sneaky things, like they put a bunch of white text where they just include the keyword over and over again behind your CV. Eventually this will get to a person, and if they see that kind of stuff, they're probably going to bump you out and think you're a cheater. So don't do that kind of thing. Just be as honest and as thorough as you can in a way that the ATS is going to pick up on. Okay, so then my last little plug is the CV and the resume only takes you 50% of the way there. Network, network, network. So they're going to be so much more likely to look at your resume if they know your name. So this can be as simple as literally introducing yourself during the job search process, calling an employer and saying, hey, I'm really interested in this position, and I just have a few questions about the job description, and just kind of getting your name in their head, or like, it was so nice to meet you, like I've submitted my application, you send them an email. If you go to a conference, get to know as many people as you can. I know that my tendency is want to like hide in my room or stick to the people I know, but go out to lunch with people, go out to happy hour, have your professor introduce you to people they know so that they can bring you into their network. Come to all the different sessions that the Career Development Center hosts. We do a ton of stuff. Think about doing research collaborations with the industry. Do informational interviews. If you want to know what those are, you can find some information on the Career Center website. Volunteer in your departments, do speaking sessions, just get to know people. And I can say that I've seen this firsthand with my husband's career being in horticulture research. People are always offering him jobs because they know him. They're like, oh yeah, you should come work for me. And he never has to try because people are always offering him jobs. I always have to go find my jobs. Okay, so, and then where do you get more help? Like I said, the Career Development Center has a whole graduate student page that's just full of stuff. We have Aurora Beyond the Professoriate, which is an awesome tool that the graduate school has recently adopted. It has tons of videos on whether you're going into industry or academia, and just great resources. And then you can also meet with people like Carla and myself to go through your CV in depth and work through the strategy for your specific job search. So you can make appointments with us on Handshake. And all of this stuff is on the Career Center website. So you don't have to remember anything I've said other than go to the Career Center website. Okay, so now we have about 5 minutes for questions. We could probably go a little bit over, but it depends on Carla's schedule as well. So questions.
There's several in the chat box, Britt, that I didn't get to. So
okay, what's our first one?
So I think the first one is the length of, I said the length, I answered this question, but the length of your resume and CV, I said is really industry specific. Someone asked about that, and that's what I wrote. Do you have anything to add about what should the length of your resume or CV be?
Cool. So then we got a question on what do you mean about presenting at conferences? Is attendance relevant? Yes, both. So if you attended or if you presented, presenting is even better. That's from Carla. What website did Aaron use? Wix. Yep, good. Decided to add relevant coursework section. Is there a good way to include the professor who taught it? I don't think that's typically relevant unless the person's really well known in the field, maybe. Usually it's just you list the names of the coursework, and sometimes people will talk about the projects within it. Can we add additional pages of only publications after the 2-page hybrid scientific resume? You could. You could add an addendum to it, a publication list. So it just depends on the type of position. What do you think about including snippets of exemplary recommendations, testimonials, reviews you received on a CV or website? Could be attractive for a website, especially if you are providing services. I mean, I think that could be helpful. I haven't seen it a lot. What do you think, Carla?
The only time I have seen recommendations on a CV or resume is usually with teaching. I have seen it if you're applying for teaching positions. I haven't seen that used anywhere else. I think that would be a great place for maybe your website. Also on LinkedIn, you can have people recommend you and also like kind of basically like you for certain skill sets. So that's where I would utilize that kind of information to get recommendations would be on LinkedIn or put it on your website. But again, usually only with teaching CVs or resumes have I seen actual recommendation comments or quotes.
Yeah, so I think it couldn't hurt, but it's not as typical. Cover letter, LinkedIn, more common. I see that Dean's hand is raised. You want to ask a question? Haven't seen you, Dean, in a while.
Hey, yeah, it's been a while. Thanks for the talk. Thanks, Carla.
Yeah.
I have, before I ask this question, I know that it's probably not answerable, and then if it is, you can just tell me so. But one thing that Carla mentioned about the ATS that was kind of freaky was she was talking about like the algorithm for it, and that it kind of spits out on a spreadsheet maybe the top 10 people who have the best match according to the ATS, right? But that seems kind of freaky, right? Because then it just seems like people are gonna, if you have like an app, 200 people applying for a job, like 10 of them are gonna try and like scam the system, and just add all the keywords, even if they don't have them. And if they only choose then the top 10 of those, even if they find out after the fact that some of those people were scamming, right? You're kind of already chopped out of the first round. Is there any like insight you have into that? Anything like, oh, don't worry about that, that's actually not a big deal sort of thing?
I would just say that there's not like a set number of how many applications they want to receive. It's going to really vary company to company. So they might say, I want to see the top 50. I want to see anybody that's above 70%. So they kind of decide what they want to do based on the number of applicants they get. But people who are scamming the system, they're not going to make it through.
Okay.
And also that spreadsheet, I mean, they're going to go and look at those top 10 resumes first. And if they notice any inconsistencies or anything that looks off, then they're going to go to the next, 10 or 15 resumes that are in.
They will. Okay.
Yeah, they will. Yeah. I mean, they have all that data, and they start with their first set of parameters. And again, every company and organization is completely different how they set that. So they'll start with their top parameter, and then they'll evaluate those and then go to the next level.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot.
They have an idea of how many people they want to do informational interviews with. On average, that's the first 10 or 15. And then if they find out, gosh, this group isn't really meeting our expectations, then they'll go to the next phase of the system's data.
Are you able to stay after a little bit, Carla, and keep answering questions? We're at about 1 o'clock.
Yeah, of course. I can stay till 1:30.
Okay, yeah, I can too. Okay, so the next question is, what do you think about including snippets of exemplary recommendations, testimonials? Sorry, I've already done that one. Sorry. Okay, how can I learn more or practice for interview questions? Building a great CV will certainly increase your chances to be interviewed, but it's just one of the steps that will guarantee a job. So we will have a session in mid-May on interviewing like a pro. We do this one every term, so I would recommend joining that. But we also have a ton of resources on our website for interviewing, including we have a video interview tool called Standout, where you can, it will generate questions and you can record yourself and watch yourself back. And then also people like Carla and myself will do mock interviews with people if you have a big interview coming up. Is it possible to download the presentation slides? Yes, with the recording, I will also send the presentation slides. If you are to add trainings or workshops, do we need to have evidence certificates in hand? Can I take that one, Carla?
You don't always get a certificate for every workshop that you attend. So you can put it on there. I have never had anyone ask for an actual, evidence that they attended, but they might ask you, so what did you learn from that presentation? So I would definitely be prepared to talk about it. I certainly wouldn't encourage anyone to put something on there that they didn't actually do. That's really critical. But having those certificates it's not always going to be present. I mean, you're not going to keep every certificate of every presentation you ever attended. And as I said, especially right now with webinars, they're not emailing you a certificate after you've attended them anyways. So just put them on there, and then have some mental notes about the things that your big takeaways from those trainings that you attended.
And then is this presentation on the Career Center website? This presentation, not exactly, but if you go to the resume and CV page, there's like a resume and CV checklist. There's tons of sample CVs up there that you can look at, see what other people have done. So there's tons of stuff up there that you can find that will get you there. And I will send this one out. How do you place invitations to speak about your expertise on my resume? I think you're talking about like invited talks might be the name of that section, or just presentations or speaking engagements. You can really make up whatever title you think works best. Lots of people saying thank you. Oh yes, Cassie added to the chat. We have a little Qualtrics survey. If you wouldn't mind popping on there, it's just like a one-page deal and just giving us any feedback on how we can make the session better. There's a couple more questions, but I also I see that Karen Hansen from the grad school is on here. Did you want to add anything, Karen? Any top tip or question or anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you for acknowledging me. But no, the session was fantastic. I think you've covered everything. It's been very thorough. Thank you so much.
Cool. Okay, so how important is it for us to cold email the people, HR, program manager, who are making final decisions? Yeah, so this is, so I can speak from my experience. After my master's degree, I went through a period of unemployment for about 5 or 6 months. It was really tough. I mean, I was a 4-point, I had a previous career, but I was having a lot of trouble getting hired. And I had a really great resume from what I knew. What made the huge difference for me was networking. The first few months of that time, I was just kind of sending out the resume, and I got maybe an interview or two, but I just really wasn't making traction. And then I made a rule for myself that I wouldn't apply to a job unless I found some way to network. And every company was different. Some companies I might just show up and say like, hey, I'm Britt, I'm just dropping off a copy of my resume, you know, if it's a, you know, an in-person place. But it was as simple as, you know, sometimes calling them and just asking questions, getting to know the recruiter, asking for an informational interview. If you go on LinkedIn, you can go under the go under Oregon State University and the alumni tab, and you can find alumni from your degree or alumni that work at certain companies and reach out to them if they are as a fellow Beaver and make a connection that way. So any way that you can make a little connection, what that does is it just helps them remember your name. So it's not that you already have to know somebody at the company. You can find somebody at the company. And then when they're reviewing their 100 resumes, if they're like, oh, I just talked to this person, they're going to pay more attention to your resume. That's all it is. So just doing that rule of try to talk to any company you want to apply to before you apply.
And I did the same thing when I was, my husband's company moved us to a new city and state, and I didn't know anyone. And so I just started emailing my resume off to a bunch of different people at different companies and organizations that I wanted to work for. And some of them emailed me back and said, gosh, thank you so much for being so proactive. We actually are going to have an opening coming up that you'd be perfect for. I'll be sure to pass your resume along to the hiring manager. So don't be afraid to make connections. You know, some people are going to be thrilled with it and some people are going to be put off by it, but you never know what door might open. At least your name's out there.
Yep. I actually did that with OSU. I really wanted to work at OSU because my husband was working there, and I just met with anybody that I could meet with. And any networking conversation, I would end with, who else can you connect me with? Mm-hmm. Who else do you know? And so then they would say, oh, you can meet with this person, and they would connect me, and so it just like webs out from there. But actually, I cold called the hiring manager that hired me in the marketing department when I first started at OSU. And he was kind of like, nah, like this is an internal position. You can't apply for it. And I was like, oh, my husband's working there, so technically I'm considered internal. And he was like, I don't think that's right. And then the next day he called me up and he was like, oh, do you want to interview? Because he read my resume. and he reviewed the HR guidelines. So he had already counted me out, thought I wasn't an internal candidate. So, I mean, that's how I got hired on an OSU, is just kind of calling around. It makes a difference. Okay, if you make art, is that something worth including in a CV or website to show some creativity? Do that one for Carla.
Okay, great. Only if it's applicable to the position would I include that. I've seen some people have a section on their resume or CV where they have hobbies or interests. And so if you have some extra space on your resume or CV and you want to, showcase some of your other skill sets, that's fine. It could make a difference in whether you make a connection with a potential hiring manager or someone on the hiring committee. Otherwise, you might include that again on your LinkedIn profile or your website. That would be a great thing. That's especially a great place to showcase your work. You can put photos on there. You can talk about it in your video if you have one on LinkedIn or in your website. That might be something you include in your cover letter more so, because your cover letter is really where you tell your story. So maybe your story can weave in how being an artist has really impacted your ability to think critically in this realm that's especially applicable to that job that you're applying to. So maybe weave that into your story in your cover letter.
And then the next question, graduate class projects have provided me with good experience. Do you think it's appreciated to be included in a CV? Yes, please. Especially if you're a career switcher, I emphasize this a lot for people. If they say, well, I don't have any experience in the field, how on earth am I going to go from being an accountant to being a natural resources specialist? Well, those projects are a lot of what you do. You create a section that's called natural resources field work. And you list those projects just like you would list a job. You give them a title of some kind, you give them an employer of some sort, whether that's the department or whether that is the name of the class, and you give it a date, you give it bullet points, and you legitimize that experience by just framing it as experience. It's not paid experience, but it's still experience. So yes, include your projects. It's some of the best experience you have in your field.
And someone else asked, do you put your references on your resume or CV? No, that's a separate page. It's not included on your actual resume or CV document. Sometimes an employer will ask you to submit all the materials as one document. So you might have multiple pages of a document and you submit it all as one. That's completely different, but it should all be on a separate page.
The one exception to that is it often shows up on government resumes. They will put references on the same one, but not usually on CVs. Any other questions? I think we got to the end of the chat. Anybody can also take themselves off mute if you have questions. Okay. I'm gonna stop the record here. Can you stop the record for us, Cassie?